Good morning to everybody and welcome to our first ClimateFit webinar open to the public. We received more than 300 registration and we have now more than 100 participants to attend this webinar. So we are grateful for your interest and curiosity about this topic. And again, thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Chiara Trozzo. I work at the CMCC Foundation, the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Research Division on Information System for Climate Science and Decision Making. I'm based in Milan, Italy. The CMCC Foundation is one of the ClimateFit partner, and this morning I will have the pleasure to accompanying you through this first ClimateFit webinar. The webinar is called Resilient Future, Unlocking Financial Strategies and Mechanisms for Climate Adaptation, and it has been organized in the framework of the Horizon Europe project called ClimateFit. And it has been organized by the ITASIF and Enviros, some of our partners, with the support of CMCC. Then in our program, we will have a dedicated talk to present our project, but just to give you a brief context about it, the project aims to bridge the finance gap for climate adaptation in Europe. For this purpose, there is a great involvement with multiple stakeholders as public authority, financial entities from multiple European territories, but also academia, as then we will learn later from our project coordinator, Stella Whittaker. So the main goal of our project is helping 20 European territories to design adaptation strategy and plans, and then boost the financing and investments for climate adaptation. Here you can see some invited speakers that I will present later, and we will also have some talks from our colleagues and partners from the different institutions of the ClimateFit Consortium. We can have a brief look at the agenda now. So as you can see in the agenda, we are going to open the webinar with a talk about the recently launched European Climate Risk Assessment report given by a dear guest of ours, Julie Berkmans from the European Environmental Agency. Then we will follow with a set of ClimateFit facilitators that will give us 4 testimonies of climate change impact on key sectors and critical infrastructure in 4 selected European territories. Thomas Machiels from Belgium, Jacopo Conti from Italy, Maxime Amendola for France, and Tiberiu Toma for Romania. Next, Alessandro Asmundo from ITASIF will explain us the EU adaptation and mitigation policy framework, and it will follow about a presentation on the climate finance landscape in Europe by our project coordinator Stella Whittaker, who will then finish with a brief presentation of the ClimateFit project. Then we will have a coffee break, and then when we reconvene from the coffee break on the second half of this webinar, we will give the floor to Kit England, that will tell us more about financial gaps on climate adaptation, using again the example from the UCRA report. After Kit, we will have again Thomas and his colleague Varnika, who will show us some best practices on innovation solution to finance climate resilient projects. And then we will finish our webinar with some inspirational talks. Firstly, from our guest, Felix van Veldhoven from the Climate Adaptation Service in Netherlands. Then our second guest, this time from Italy, Dario Mangilli, Head of Sustainability at Impact SGR. And then we will finalize the session with another important guest, Gijs Kloek from the Dutch Sustainable Finance Platform and Working Group on Climate Adaptation that belongs to the Netherlands Bank. Before, just an information, before the closure of our webinar, we will then open the space for question and answer from the others, so around 15 minutes. But just to agilize the process and answer the maximum number of the questions possible, we kindly invite you to formulate your question in the chat during the presentation. And then the respective speakers will try to provide you the answer through the same via once they finish their talk. The webinar will be conducted in English and will be recorded for the project purposes. There is the possibility that then the material and the recording will be shared with all participants registered, but upon agreement with our speakers. We will then keep in touch with you for this purpose after the webinar. But so now let's start. So as I mentioned before, I will now give the floor to Julie Berkmans to present the main result of the European Climate Risk Assessment and on the EU communication on managing climate risk. Julie is an EEA climate risk expert. She holds a master in meteorology from the University of Wageningen and PhD in physical science from the University of Antwerp. During her career, she has been working in atmospheric sciences, modeling and forecasting severe weather, studying the impact of land use on climate, and also on data analysis and tools development linked with the Copernicus climate change services. To develop a research topic, Julie worked and visited the multiple research centers such as the University of Reading, the University Cologne, the Royal Observatory and Royal Meteorological Institute of Belgium, and Copernicus at ACMWF. And she joined the EEA in 2022, where she now works as climate risk expert. A recently major contribution has been made through the recently launched EEA report, the first European Climate Risk Assessment, EUCRA, where Julie and the EEA colleagues work collaboratively with hundreds of authors to assess the main and most urgent climate risks affecting Europe. So Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chiara, for the elaborate introduction, and thank you also for inviting me here. So first of all, good morning, everyone from sunny Copenhagen. So as introduced, my name is Julie Berkmans, and I will give you some highlights of the first ever European Climate Risk Assessment. Just to give you some overview of the situation we are in now, Europe is not sufficiently prepared for rapidly growing climate risks. At the global level, we are already reaching up to 1.5 degrees warming. Now in Europe, that is even more because Europe is warming faster than the globe. And this is even double. So Europe is warming double as fast as the global average. Now, this warming, this climate change, this has impacts on different systems. It has impacts on our ecosystems, on our water resources, on our food and energy security. It has an impact on our infrastructure, on our financial stability, and on the human health. Now, this is for the past. If we look into the future, we can expect increase in European temperature by the end of the century up to 7 degrees. And if you just look into this map and into this graph, and you see on the horizontal axis, you see the years, and you see on the vertical axis, you see the temperature increase, and that for the different warming scenarios, even in the positive even in the low warming scenario, so where we are Paris compliant, we can expect the temperature increase in Europe for about 3 degrees increase by the end of the century, and up to 7 degrees for the high warming scenarios. Now in Europe, for Europe, we want to help society be prepared. And this is done by presenting the European climate risk assessment as the first step. Now I would like to guide you through the approach, how we assessed the climate risks in Europe in the current and the future climate. First of all, it was a fast track assessment. We conducted the assessment in less than 1.5 years. Second, it was expert driven and it was evidence-based. Then we involved many stakeholders. We involved the whole European, like many departments of the European Commission, and also others, key stakeholders from universities, from research institutes, and so on. We identified major risks per system and per sector, but also across systems and sectors. Then we identified the priorities for action. And finally, we used several interactive tools. Now, the European Climate Risk Assessment, so EUCRA, consists of several products. First of all, there is an executive summary. This is published in March, 11th of March. Second, we have a technical report, which is called the main report. This is already published in an unedited version, but will be published by the end of this month in the full layouted edited version. And finally, we have an online viewer where we present several results of the data, of the figures, of the report in an interactive format. Now let's just dive a bit into the structure of the report. The report, the assessment, has been done for two main elements in the report, and this is done in two different formats. So on the top, we have the thematic fact sheets, and on the bottom in the green, we have the storylines. The thematic fact sheets, they actually describe risks per sector or per system. And they describe the climatic and the non-climatic drivers of those risks. And they cover topics from terrestrial and freshwater, marine and coastal ecosystems. They cover aspects like water and food and energy security. And they cover a built environment, and they cover the EU outermost regions. And then a second element of the report are the risk storylines. They describe risks for across systems and sectors. So how they interplay between the different systems and sectors, and how they can create new crises or emergencies or aggravate even existing crises or emergencies in Europe. These risk storylines, they cover aspects or topics on extreme heat and prolonged drought, on large-scale flooding, on infectious diseases, on forest disturbances and carbon sinks. They also cover aspects, if we go to the bottom, on major disruption of critical infrastructure, disruption of international supply chains, and the stability of financial markets and public finances. We have, in addition to the storylines and fact sheets, the report also covers synthesizing chapters. Those chapters, they bring the information together from the fact sheets and the storylines and link it with social aspects and the policy context. We have a chapter where we assess the risk and assess the risks into 5 different clusters in a major climate risks for Europe chapter. Then there is a chapter on social justice and cohesion. There is a chapter on EU adaptation policies and risk ownership. And finally, there are priorities for action. These policy priorities are then grouped into 5 clusters within the report. Now, climate risks, they are a combination of climate-related hazards and non-climatic risk drivers on the other hand. Here you can see a figure where we present the different drivers of the risk and where you see the direct impacts and the indirect impacts. On the left side in the yellow, you can see the direct impacts, and in the orange red, you can see the cascading impacts and risks. Now, these different drivers, they work together and they can create direct impacts, for example, on ecosystems, like climate-related hazards such as extreme heat, prolonged drought, together with pollution and together with poor land use, unsustainable land use, they can create impacts on ecosystems. But that can cascade to other systems like infrastructure, food, health, and finally even economy and finance. And this is what we call cascading impacts. Just to give an example of the mega drought. So a mega drought can have impact on food production because of water scarcity. It can also have impact on wildfires that can have an impact on air pollution, which can then also have an impact on our human health. And finally, it can even impact our infrastructure and our economy and finance. Now, in the report, we present 36 climate risks. They are grouped by 5 different clusters. Those clusters include ecosystems, food, health, infrastructure, economy, and finance. And those different risks, they are assessed by their severity, by their policy characteristics, and by their urgency to act. We have concluded that out of the 36 identified risks, there are 21 risks that need action now. They need more action, they need urgent action, which you can see in the dark red and the blue colors here on this graph. Now, several of those risks, they will reach critical and even catastrophic levels by the end of the century. Now, if we look into the specific risks that we have identified, you can see that many of the risks actually lie in the ecosystem cluster and in the health cluster, where there are many risks that need urgent action now. And just to give you a flavor of one of the clusters, here you can see the economy and the finance cluster, where we have identified different risks. On the left side, you can see the names of the risks. For example, the European Solidarity Mechanism that is at risk because of climate change. And it needs urgent action now, which is indicated by the purple color. And this is a combination of risk severity that is increasing in the future in combination with policy readiness that we define as the readiness, how the policy is prepared to address these risks, which we analyze as conclude as medium. And this combination creates an urgent action for the European solidarity mechanisms. And I'm sure that my colleagues later on will cover these results from the UCRA in more detail. So I will not present you all the details now. Just to conclude on our key takeaways for the European climate risk assessment. First of all, several major climate risks have already reached critical levels now. And in the future, almost all of the risks will reach critical or even catastrophic levels by the end of the century, under the assumption of high warming scenarios. Another conclusion from our assessment is that societal preparedness is lagging behind the fast increase in major climate risks. Also, we must act now to increase our resilience, because we need to increase our resilience now, but also in the future. Another important takeaway from the assessment is that climate adaptation policies, they need to consider multiple policy objectives together. So they cannot work in isolation. Most of the major climate risks that we have identified in the assessment, they are co-owned by the EU and the member states. It means that the responsibility to act lies both at the EU level, but also at the member states level. So there is a more tighter coordination needed between those different levels of governance. And finally, a stronger EU policy action is urgently needed to manage the several major climate risks assessed in our EUCRA. So with this, I would like to close. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the chat. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie, for this comprehensive overview on the latest results of the climate risk assessment in Europe. While now we are moving to the next session, so on the testimonies of our 4 facilitators, now in the chat you can find a poll, so I kindly ask you to answer the questions. So as just mentioned, we are now moving to the next session. So we will ask our 4 facilitators to present their testimonies on the key sectors and critical infrastructure in 4 selected EU territories. The first one is the Flanders region in Belgium, and the speaker will be Thomas Machiels from the University of Antwerp. Thomas holds a master's degree in history and urban design and planning from the University of Antwerp. He was a visiting researcher at the City University of Hong Kong and the University of Michigan. And in 2023, he obtained his PhD in urbanism and spatial planning with the title Real Option for Real Urban Project, Uncertainty and Adaptive Planning in Complex Spatial Project. Since September 2023, he has been part of the European Horizon Project ClimateFit to conduct research about alternative financing instruments for climate adaptation project. The University of Antwerp is also one of ClimateFit partners and is part also of the ClimateFit facilitators team to support the engagement with public authorities and financial and investment entities. Finally, Thomas is also a member of the GCORO, a municipal commission for spatial planning in Olset since September 2020. So Thomas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. So if we can proceed to the next slide. Yes, next slide. So I'll give you a quick introduction about Flanders and the climate change situation there. So Flanders is the northern Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, located in Western Europe. As a state in Belgium, Flanders is the highest authority responsible for climate, environment, and spatial policies on its territory. And as seen on this map from the European Climate Risk Assessment Report, Western Europe will experience an increase in mean temperature, heat wave days, droughts, and extreme rainfalls or heavy precipitation. Next slide, please. And so droughts, heat waves, and flooding are the 3 main climate risks for Flanders, and the effects of climate change are amplified in Flanders because of its specific context. Lying at the North Sea, it has a maritime climate and is overall a low-lying region, making it sensitive to sea level rise. Flanders is a small but densely populated and urbanized region with a high share of developed land and urban sprawl and low shares of nature and forest areas compared to other EU countries. And these conditions lead to high stormwater runoff, low infiltration, and high urban heat island effects, amplifying the effects of heat waves, droughts, and flooding. And some facts and figures shown on this slide help illustrate this point. So Flanders has around 6.7 million inhabitants and a population density of almost 500 people per square kilometer, which is the 2nd highest population density in the EU on a country level. 15% of Flanders is sealed surface, ranking 2nd in the EU together with the Netherlands and behind Malta. And sealed surface means that it is covered with artificial material that does not allow water infiltration. 12% of Flanders is covered by forests compared to 35 to 40% of for the EU countries on average, ranking among the lowest regions in the EU. 90% of habitats in Flanders are in bad shape, ranking worst in Europe, and 32.4% of land in Flanders is covered for housing, industry, recreation, services, transportation, and energy infrastructure, again ranking highest in Europe. Next slide, please. Now, the impacts of climate change are already very visible in Flanders today. According to the World Resources Institute, Belgium ranks 18th in the world in terms of water stress. It is one of the 25 countries in the world that faces extremely high water stress each year, regularly using up almost the entire available water supply on an annual basis. The floods of 2021 that struck Belgium and its neighboring countries, Germany, France, and the Netherlands, ranked second in the world that year in terms of damage costs of natural disasters. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that current climate scenarios predict an average increase of heat wave days in the coming decade. So by 2030, 2050, 2100, compared to 2000, 2018, and this number increases even faster in the many urban and developed areas that we have in Flanders. So droughts, heat waves, and floods have cascading effects on multiple sectors, including public health and well-being, agriculture, economy, urban and transportation infrastructure, etc. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that the Flemish government is very aware of these climate risks, and it published its climate adaptation plan in 2022 with three main goals. First of all, reducing heat stress in residential areas to stop the increase of excess mortality. Second, to reduce drought and risks of water scarcity. And third, to reduce flooding both inland and through coastline protection at the North Sea. Now, the plan emphasizes green-blue infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And in addition to the climate adaptation plan, Flanders also has a climate strategy for 2050 and an energy and climate plan for 2030, with objectives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Flemish Spatial Policy Plan has the goal to achieve net zero land take by 2040. And finally, the Blue Deal and its current investment plan tries to tackle droughts and water scarcity. Now, climate adaptation finance today in Flanders and also in its municipalities is mainly short-term and relies heavily on public funding through grants and subsidies. Flanders does not have an investment strategy or an investment plan for the long term or to achieve long-term goals of these policy initiatives. And for future financing, Flanders would like to diversify its financial sources and instruments through innovative adaptation financing and funding solutions that combine public and private capital, which we try to develop in ClimateFit. And with that, I'd like to pass on the word to the next speaker. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. Thank you. Now, let's move to Italy, to the city of Brescia. So now we have the pleasure to have with us Jacopo Conti from Ambiente Italia. Jacopo is graduated in sociology and he obtained a master's degrees from Sciences Po University in Paris and Fudan University in Shanghai. He has been collaborating with Ambiente Italia since 2019 in the field of communication, reporting, and sustainability. Ambiente Italia is one of our partners and is part of the ClimateFit facilitators team. So, Jacopo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So we can go to the first slide to begin with. So today we'll present to you the city of Brescia. Brescia is a city with approximately 200,000 inhabitants, located in the Lombardia region in the northwestern part of Italy. Brescia is situated between two geographical regions, the Prealps and the Po Valley, which is notorious for its unfortunate status as one of the most polluted areas in Europe. A quick overview on the territory. The municipality of Brescia has a total area of 90 square kilometers, predominantly composed of urbanized areas, accounting for 55% of the entire territory, followed by agricultural zones, 24%, the rest being natural environments. Half of this 55% is composed by residential facilities and the other half by productive fabric, infrastructure, services, etc. Climate change is posing already significant concerns for the territory, with visible effects evident in the city. Brescia is affected by extremely high temperatures in summer months, leading to urban heat island effects increasingly felt over the years. Moreover, average temperatures are projected to rise dramatically in all analyzed scenarios, posing risks for the population's health. A very clear example of this is the increase in mortality rate among the elderly population, which during the summer months rose from 4% in 2017 to 11% in 2020. Precipitation patterns show anomalies as well, with alternating prolonged droughts impacting water management systems and intense rainfall increasing the risk of urban floods and landslides. The main risk resulting from intense precipitation events in Brescia are primarily two: the overflow of surface water bodies in the upstream water basins and flooding in urban areas due to insufficient drainage systems, which are incapable of handling large quantities of water in a short time. Under these conditions, excess creates accumulation and water courses in streets, low-lying areas, and infrastructure such as underpasses, the metro system of the city, as well as in lower floors of the building. These impacts create challenges for both public health and infrastructure. For instance, the energy system has been identified by regional guidelines as in extreme need of a radical shift towards a decentralized perspective to ensure resilience to future scenarios. Slide, please. The municipality of Brescia is tackling adaptation through various local and supra-local initiatives, one of which is the climate transition strategy. It was adopted in 2021 and it is planned to continue up until 2025. It embraces three models to redesign the city. The first is the oasis city, which means creating shaded and cool areas and integrating nature into urban spaces to enhance people's well-being and improve the urban microclimate. The second one is the sponge city, which means prioritizing water retention and permeability. And lastly, cities for people, which translates into enhancing livable spaces while ensuring the rights to health, social interaction, and inclusion. Slide, please. This strategy was made possible through funds received from a grant program created by Cariplo Foundation, a non-profit organization involved in various environmental, social, and cultural projects in northern Italy. Additionally, it received co-funding from the region and other partnerships. The majority of the strategy's budget have been allocated to adaptation actions, including interventions to reduce impermeable surfaces, development of green and blue infrastructures using nature-based solutions, carbon farming projects, reforestation efforts, and pilot projects to mitigate flood risks. Next slide, please. The municipality of Brescia is committed to fighting climate change, and the awareness is increasing both inside the administration and among citizens. As the climate transition strategy nears its conclusion, Brescia is working to establish a robust plan to finance and implement effective actions for the territory. This includes ensuring a coherent and comprehensive vision, a solid governance, and sufficient financial leverage to meet the city's budgetary needs. Furthermore, a new air and climate plan is currently under development, which will further outline the path forward in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacopo. So let's continue our journey in Europe. And now from Italy, let's move to France, to Strasbourg with Maxime Amendola from the Strasbourg Climate Agency. Maxime graduated in Economic Science and Management by the Université Paris-Créteil and holds a master's degree in Project Management and Evaluation by the Université de la Sorbonne in Paris. He is a project manager with more than 10 years of practical experience in designing and implementing complex international projects in the fields of climate, energy, and economical transition. After multiple professional experiences in the Parisian area, Maxime joined the Strasbourg Climate Agency, in 2022, where he developed his skills in the field of public sector, climate change adaptation, territorial development, and project financing. Strasbourg Climate Agency is one of the members of ClimateFit project and part of the facilitators team. So Maxime, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chiara. So I'm going to introduce you some vulnerabilities of Strasbourg metropolitan area. So for those who are not familiar with Strasbourg, Strasbourg is located in the far east side of France, at the border with Germany, which is materialized by the Rhine River. So on the next slide, I'm going to present you some brief description of the metropolitan area. So there is 33 municipalities gathering more or less 500,000 inhabitants, making it the 9th largest metropolitan area in France. The 33 municipalities are including the municipality of Strasbourg, which gathers more than 50% of the metropolitan area population. The 32 other municipalities are very diverse, with some rural villages with less than 1,000 inhabitants and other important cities with more than 25,000 inhabitants. Important also to have in mind that the metropolitan area is located above the Rhine water table and counts more than 500 kilometers of waterways. We are also having a semi-continental climate, and it's also important to note that we have more or less than 30% of land covered by agricultural area. On the next slide, I will present the two key vulnerabilities of the territories. So many studies have been made since 2012, let's say, in light of the development of the climate strategy of Strasbourg metropolitan area. And there is two main risks identified. So the first one is the vulnerability to heavy rains, mostly caused by land consumption, also an undersized sewage system, and of course less permeable soil caused by the urbanization of the territory, and as Julia mentioned at the introduction, there is an increasing number of intense rainy period caused by climate change, which increase, of course, the vulnerability of the territory to heavy rain. Of course, these observations have consequences on the functioning of the water cycle and cause damages such as flooding, increase the runoff on mud flows also, and water pollution. The second vulnerabilities, the extreme heat episodes, exacerbate with the dense urban tissue of the metropolitan area and the rise of temperature caused by climate change. And of course, these urban island effects causes damages on population health, biodiversity, and also negative impact on air quality. On the next slide, you will see a map showing the different vulnerable areas to rainfall events, and can see that on the spots circled in red, there is the highest vulnerability with the different risks identified, such as floods, mud flows, rising groundwaters. The northeast of the metropolitan area is highly vulnerable to mud flows because of sloping grounds and also agricultural land and an important urbanization of soil, of course. And we also have identified some strategic sites, critical sites, and also companies that are vulnerable to those risks. On the next slide, you will have a map showing the vulnerability to extreme heat on the territory. So, for example, this map is showing the percentage of population affected by extreme heats during a normal summer and a scorching summer on the right side. So, of course, the study also highlighted the importance of promoting greening of spaces and an important work on urbanism and the characteristics of buildings. On the next slide, so I presented briefly the two main vulnerabilities. I unfortunately won't be able to present you the innovative solutions and the different solutions we are implementing on the territory, but I will just say a few words on the climate strategy elaborated by the Eurometropolis of Strasbourg in 2019. With first a strategy and an action plan also. It's interesting to see that in 2019, there was no specific chapter on adaptation and risk. But now, since March of this year, there is an updated version of this climate strategy where there is now a full axis dedicated to adaptation strategy and adaptation action. And it includes 5 main objectives that you can have it on the screen. And there is 21 action identified with dedicated budget, resources, timelines to implement solution and to face those risks that we have identified. It's important also to have in mind that this, let's say, adaptation action plan has been elaborated with the different stakeholders at local, regional, or national level. On the final slide, I will just say a few words on the financing of this adaptation action. It's a work in progress, and with the main objective is to diversify and find new sources of financing for adaptation, because as mentioned, the climate strategy and adaptation action are mostly financed by public funds or grants. So we are already working on identifying some private fundings using, for example, carbon certification schemes or philanthropic schemes, energy certificates also. But we are glad to be part of ClimateFit to maybe identify new solutions. One of our main challenges to the financing of adaptation is also to accurately estimate our financing on adaptation, because so far our estimation of cost is mostly made on, let's say, new project and our adaptation action plans. But we are not, for example, the additional cost for adaptation of buildings or for using, for example, bio-based materials or the development of cooling systems is not taking into account yet in our investment plan. So this is one of the big challenge. And the other one is the link with the economic and the private financial players of the territory that need to be strengthened to work together on this global issue on adaptation. And that's it. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Maxim. So let's finish our journey in Romania. So with Tiberiu Toma from the Alba Local Energy Agency. Tiberiu Toma is an ALEA communication expert, and he actively participated in the execution of European funded projects spanning various sustainability initiatives across diverse programs. His expertise lies in overseeing projects, communication, public engagement, and organizing energy-focused campaigns. His experience also extends in crafting sustainability planning documents and formulating recommendations aimed at enhancing sustainable policy implementation. So Tiberio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We shall start with the first. Yes, thank you. Today I'm going to present the city of Alba Iulia. And first, some basic facts and figures. Alba Iulia is the administrative center of Alba County. The city is a blend of administrative functionalities, educational institution, and the historical significance. It presents a diverse profile, but especially the tourism sector flourishes due to its historical significance, offering a blend of culture and heritage. Located in the historic region of Transylvania in the Central Development Region, Alba Iulia lies in the center of the Transylvanian Plateau with an average altitude of 235 meters. With a population of around 75,000 inhabitants covering an area of almost 105 square kilometers, Alba Iulia offers space for both urban development and natural landscapes. Next slide, please. Well, Alba Iulia faces several primary climate hazards, as most of the cities we heard. Just listing the main ones, these are floods and heavy rains, heat waves, severe storms, and extreme winds. Obviously, these hazards pose challenges and have impacts on the city. Limited drainage capacity of rainwater aggravates flooding, leading to property damage and safety concerns. On the bottom picture, you can see the red area, a big part of the city, exposed to the rainwater coming down the hill, represented by the green area. Also reduced green spaces, raise surface temperatures, and reduce air quality. On the right picture, represented in vivid green, the present green areas which are evidently less than desired. Then increase of urban heat islands intensifies temperature differentials and discomfort for residents. In the left upper picture, you can observe the numerous critical areas. And finally, another challenge is represented by the increase of damage to the built environment. Here, namely, historical buildings are particularly vulnerable to erosion and damage, impacting the city's cultural heritage. As for the affected sectors, these are the built and natural environment, communities, local businesses, and transport. Next slide, please. Alba Iulia has climate adaptation and mitigation plan in force, elaborated by ALEA and the municipality of Alba Iulia. Among its main direction for future actions, I can mention the increase of water drainage system capacity that will, of course, mitigate flood risks, the increase of urban green areas within the urban landscape that will enhance biodiversity and improve air quality, the mitigation of urban heat islands. The measures reducing surface temperatures and improving microclimates that will enhance the city's resilience to extreme heat events. The mitigation of effects of heat waves. The measures here are to protect vulnerable population and enhance cooling infrastructure that will minimize the impact of heat waves on especially public health. Some of the already implemented projects or currently under implementation, I can list here just a few. The main ones: building envelope works, the improvement of the thermal performance of buildings to reduce energy consumption and enhance comfort levels. The small-scale urban regeneration works. Here we are talking about the revitalization of urban spaces and infrastructure to improve livability and resilience. Implementation of the new urban mobility plan. This is a big one for the city. It is the promotion of sustainable transportation option to reduce emissions within the city. A small-scale demo project for air quality monitoring within Alba Iulia Smart City Initiative, the use of smart technology to monitor air quality for informed decision-making. The implementation of PV systems, the installation of these photovoltaic panels on public and private buildings to promote renewable energy generation, especially to improve air quality in the city center and the surrounding area. The restoration of riverbeds in the vicinity of the city, namely the Mureș River, the Ampoi River. The rehabilitation of river ecosystems to enhance water management and ecological resilience. And of course, expansion of green spaces. We have also started that, the municipality also started that, but with the creation of new parks and green corridors to improve urban biodiversity. Next slide, please. As for the challenges in the near future, the city faces a heightened risk of new hazards, climate hazards, such as strong wind gusts, which can pose significant threats to infrastructure and public safety. It is also experiencing an increase in the percentage of its aging population, mainly of whom are medically and financially vulnerable to the present climatic hazards. The degradation of air, water, and food quality poses a growing health risk to residents, needing measures to safeguard public health. Rising temperatures lead to increased energy consumption for cooling and dehumidifying indoor spaces, aggravating, of course, environmental strain and energy demands. And even despite these challenges, there is a low level of awareness among the inhabitants regarding climate hazards, highlighting the need for education and community engagement initiatives. Next slide, please. Regarding the essential climate adaptation and resilience projects required to address the challenges, we need to mention here the increase in the local production and use of energy from renewable sources, which will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve air quality. Elaboration of specialized studies to quantify the effects of climate hazards and identify necessary adaptation measures, which will provide insights for informed decision-making and, of course, effective risk management. Development of urban monitoring systems, these for monitorization of environmental conditions, which will enable real-time data collection and analysis, which in turn facilitates proactive responses to emerging climate challenges. The integration of climate and energy aspects in urban planning. This will create conditionalities and obligations for future urban developments, ensuring that sustainability and resilience are prioritized. So we are starting with the core of this, the basic spatial planning, the general urban plan. The development of specific urban systems, such as enhancing drainage capacity, increasing green spaces, and developing e-mobility infrastructure. All these will enhance resilience and improve quality of life, of course. Repurposing paved surfaces as green spaces will mitigate the urban heat island effect, enhance biodiversity, and improve urban aesthetics. Enhancing the local water balance system will optimize water resource management and reduce the risk of flooding. Adaptation of utility systems, including energy, water, sewage, and drainage, the most important one, to withstand climate impacts. These will ensure reliable services delivery and minimize vulnerability to climate hazards to the city. And by prioritizing these initiatives, the city can effectively mitigate these risks, enhance environmental quality, and improve the life of the residents. Regarding the financial sources needed for this, the financial sources and mechanisms considered by the municipality for implementing climate adaptation and resilience projects in Albania have mainly been public funding. The city has access to public funding sources, including those provided by the EU and national programs dedicated to sustainability in general. These funding streams offer significant support for initiatives aimed at mitigating climate risks as well. In terms of private funding, when in addition to the public ones, private sources of financing such as bank loans and investments have also been considered by the municipality. Private investors have shown some interest in funding initiatives that also cover climate-related aspects, aligning with their sustainability objectives, of course. This is all for for Alba Iulia, Romania. And thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiberio, for this comprehensive overview. So now let's move to the next speaker and the next topic. So we have now Alessandro Asmundo. Alessandro is a policy officer at the Italian Sustainable Investments Forum, ITASIF, one of the ClimateFit partner, and is active to promote sustainability in finance. Alessandro will give us a brief overview of the EU adaptation and mitigation policy framework. So Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thank you, Chiara, and ClimateFit colleagues for this great introduction. I think that you gave me the opportunity to underline why the policy framework is so crucial, actually related to climate adaptation in Europe. First of all, I would like to reiterate again the urgency of climate change adaptation in ensuring the Europe prosperous development, sustainable development in the future. And this will become clearer and clearer once we delve into the policy framework of our European region. Implementing climate adaptation measures is crucial both at regional and local levels. So it's not just a necessity, but a strategic move to enhance resilience all over the Europe, and requires for a coordinated effort explaining why a centralized approach is needed today. So starting from which are the foundations of climate resilient policies in Europe. First thing to say is that the European Union has a pioneer role on adaptation, on climate policies, on sustainability policies, starting in this context, for example, from the European Strategy on Adaptation published, adopted in 2013, which has been updated 3 years ago, actually, and it was somehow the testament of the EU leadership and commitment on climate adaptation. The foundation of this effort are based on the need to promote a greater coordination, as I was saying, coherence and information sharing in the Union that is based on subsidiarity. On subsidiarity for sure. Indeed, climate adaptation requires, as I was saying, a coordinated joint effort of many actors, public and private, public and private investors, as well as at European, Italian, regional, and local level again. Improved access to funding is for sure critical to build a climate resilient Europe, and this is why most of the European policies affecting sustainability had the target to involve the overall investor community in supporting public and private activities, projects, and companies. As you know, the European climate law that is somehow set the foundation on sustainability targets in Europe is responsible for setting stone somehow the goal of the European Green Deal, meaning defining the long-term direction to be met in Europe in 2050. That is the climate neutrality objective through a cross-sectional approach with some and several ambitious intermediate target to set, again, Europe on a responsible path to becoming climate neutral by 2050, starting from the intermediate target of reducing the greenhouse gas emission by 55% by 2030. Mitigation objectives are strongly related, Savasandir, to the adaptation ones, since it's the only adaptation is the only option, is the only opportunity to be able to reach actually effectively these topics. The Euro Climate Law defines stronger provision on adaptation to climate change alongside mitigation once again, and is strongly connected and aligned to the adoption of a European strategy on adaptation to climate change. We'll see it later on in this presentation. Of course, it relies on the adoption and implementation of national adaptation strategies and plans. Again, looking at the concept of subsidiarity, the direct involvement of regions and local authorities, as it was presented also by my colleagues, and being one of the main focus, if not the main focus of ClimateFit project, is fundamental in actually reaching again the climate goal in Europe. And third point is not only setting the targets, defining the action plans to reach those targets, but also, of course, to assess the progress made by all the member states on adaptation. As I was saying, the EU climate law was aligned to a new strategy on adaptation to climate change to forge a climate resilience Europe. I was undecided actually until the end which one of these two laws should come first, since they were published almost simultaneously and strongly affect and directly influence each other. The strategy again has three main objectives, of course, starting from defining the long-term vision of the European Union to become a climate resilient society, reinforcing the adaptive capacity at all the levels. These three objectives are defining, creating a smarter adaptation, so improving knowledge and managing uncertainty on a topic that is, for several reasons, we will deep dive in this during this webinar, quite difficult, having a more systemic adaptation, so supporting policy developments at all the levels and all the relevant policy fields, as for example, Julie explained at the beginning of this event this morning, and fostering a faster adaptation, so to speed up adaptation implementation across all Europe. During this year, 2024, there will be a specific communication on managing climate risks, for example, is related to UCRA, of course, to give the proper information to all the actors involved in adaptation targets, adaptation actions, to make informed decision somehow. So now moving to the EU Sustainable Finance Framework, actually. So how we can, from the point of view of investors, of course, foster climate change adaptation. First of all, the main target of the European Union since the Action Plan on Financing Sustainable Growth in 2018. So probably the action plan that defined the actual targets for sustainable development in Europe. The main targets were to harmonize compliance, innovation, and resilience among different sectors, topics, and activities, working on three main pillars actually that we will see in the next slides. These three pillars are the definition of a shared classifications to define what is sustainable and what is not, looking at the, of course, financial and economic activities. And the answer to this need was provided by the European taxonomy of sustainable activities. The second pillar were ESG data, sustainability data that were reliable, that were granular and precise to be used to have an informed decision-making process. And the third one is, of course, transparency. These three pillars actually are like some of the fil rouge of all the different policy intervention that you will see mentioned on the left side of this slide. Today, of course, we have to be synthetic somehow and to wrap up all the effort that the European Union made in the last 5 years, of course, to reach its climate goal and sustainability goals. We'll shortly talk about the European taxonomy, about the corporate sustainability reporting directive affecting, therefore, the reporting of sustainability data. And as an example, we'll talk about the European Green Bond Standard, also to try and define some of the interventions made by the European Union in terms of standard setting. So not only through regulations and directive, but also in trying to define which could be the best practices, the gold standards for the market to support environmentally sustainable initiatives. Starting from the European taxonomy, I'm quite sure that most of you already know in detail this instrument, but it's always important to underline it again. It's again a shared classification of activities that could be defined environmentally sustainable based on a scientific approach. So through several technical screening criteria to create, a common playing ground for both companies, public authorities, and investors to define what is sustainable and what is not. Taxonomy defines 6 environmental and climate objectives. One of these is for sure climate change adaptation, strongly related to climate change mitigation, of course. We are today starting to assess the actual figures regarding the alignment of economic activities to each one of the sustainability objectives of the taxonomy, and these figures are still quite low, but it's, I would say, quite comprehensible. One of the points is that today climate change adaptation seems not relevant as climate change mitigation in in reporting of companies' activities alignment. I think that, for example, one of the objectives of our project is to try and support again this kind of disclosure, underline the fundamental role, the vital role of coupling climate change mitigation adaptation again. To be sustainable in activity has to make a substantial contribution, in this case, to the climate change adaptation objective without causing significant harm to any of the other objective, of course. And the European Union imagined also the requirements to comply to some minimum safeguards on the social aspects at the company level to ensure that the economic activity is carried out in a sustainable way. Looking specifically to the technical screening criteria for climate change adaptation, so the threshold, the quantitative threshold to state officially, publicly, that an activity is aligned to the objective of climate change adaptation. Again, the substantial contribution looks at activities that has to contribute to the reduction of the negative effect of current and expected future climate change, and or prevent an increase, so on a, let's say, negative side, or shifting of negative effects to climate change. Looking at the climate change adaptation, they do not significant harm, so the DNSH clause requires for a robust climate risk and vulnerability assessment, that of course is crucial looking at the adaptation topics, and at the implementation of physical and non-physical solutions to reduce the most significant physical climate risks relevant to that activities. Climate change adaptation, the technical screening criteria for climate change adaptation are among the few that specifically explicitly state which are the climate-related hazards to be taken into account when conducting a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. You can see it on the bottom of this slide. I won't go through in detail, since I don't want to steal any time to my colleagues in their presentation. But of course, it's quite interesting to see how the approach is quite solid, okay, with respect to other, for example, sustainable objectives of the taxonomy. Moving to my next slide, before leaving the floor again to Chiara. As I was saying, we try to underline that the point in climate change adaptation objective and in the sustainable finance framework is not only to set rules on definition or binding requirements on definition and so on, but also to try and work both on reporting, disclosure, and standard setting. About this, the EU Green Bond standard is one of the probably best examples. It's strongly related to the European taxonomy and is strongly related to climate change adaptation, since a European Green Bond standard to be defined as UGBS needs to finance economic activities that are substantially aligned with the European taxonomy, and therefore, for example, an adaptation green bond should be aligned, should finance activities that are aligned to the climate change adaptation objectives. It aims to represent a gold standard, not only at the European level, but also a global level, to structure and create financial instruments that, for example, are crucial in financing activities of public authorities, activities related to climate change adaptation is really, really ambitious at a global level, and we'll see in the next few years which will be the effect of this standard. Not only standard setting, but also disclosure and risk-based forward-looking framework to define what needs to be assessed and how to tell the story, let's say, to the market. I would like to really shortly point out the role of Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that updated the non-financial reporting directive, widening the scope of companies included in the previous directive, setting some reporting standard, common reporting standard, ambitious common reporting standard at European level, aimed to provide to the market high quality data to be used both to select the most ambitious and robust projects on several topics regarding sustainability, and in the interest of this project or this event, of course, the one related to climate change adaptation, with specific, for example, disclosure requirements regarding climate-related hazards and transition risks. And again, looking at risks, Europe is strongly working also on risk-based forward-looking frameworks, for example, Solvency II, so the directive affecting the potential treatment of sustainability factors, risk and preferences for insurance companies and investors. The same goes, or could go maybe in the future also for the banking institutions intervening on capital requirements, to think about possible different treatments of the exposure to sustainable activities and sustainable financing. To wrap up, the point is European was quite ambitious in defining its targets, its goals, its objectives regarding sustainability, most of all climate sustainability, and is starting to focus more and more on climate change adaptation for sure. Probably the main takeaway is that we need to be even more ambitious in trying and work to harmonize all the different policies and regulation to let climate change adaptation let's say emerge somehow with respect to climate change mitigation, and for sure this is one of the objectives of ClimateFit. I leave the floor again to Chiara, and thank you all.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you. So now let's move to the final two presentation of our first session. So carried out by Stella Whittaker, our project coordinator. Stella Whittaker is an experienced global sustainability and governance expert, and she has been a principal consultant in sustainability and climate change, providing advice to the corporate world, governments, ministries, and NGOs across the globe in environment, climate, sustainability, and other topics. Stella holds a Master on European Environmental Policy and Regulation by the Lancaster University, and she's now developing her PhD in climate finance at the Copenhagen Business School. She's from the World Climate Foundation, and she's our project coordinator. So Stella, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, Chiara. I'll do a quick presentation through the investment landscape and then finish with a very quick overview of ClimateFit. The first slide, please. Our first work package in ClimateFit is to actually understand the financial and investment entities point of view and their maturity in terms of responding to climate adaptation challenges. Next slide. It is a really burgeoning area. So this is just a snapshot of a few of the more than 20 practitioner guides that have been published in the last 2 years, and they're nature and adaptation. ClimateFit's remit, we do include nature in looking at the solutions because there is a major contribution to adaptation from nature solutions. We see the two as quite linked, and a recent study by Race to Zero said there was about 30% of nature solutions actually have an adaptation contribution. So you can see from these snapshot of about 6 publications. They're coming from key finance sector organizations and some from regulators. They're coming from around the globe, and as I said, they've been in the last couple of years. So you've got a major report that came out this year from the European Investment Bank on investing in nature-based solutions. You have a major report that came out from USAID and the Boston Consulting Group on risks to reward, talking about the opportunities investing in adaptation. The Green Finance Institute in the UK produced Mission Climate Ready, which was a call to action on climate adaptation, and the EU mission itself has done a guide on funding and financing for adaptation. There's lots more. But I would like to stress in all of this, and I'll stress on the other slides, we had an introduction from about UCRA and the European level of climate stress and impacts that we're likely to we are experiences and likely to experience. And so we need to keep in mind, is our response, both from a municipal level and also from financial entities, is it proportional to that risk that we're stating? Is it matched to that risk? We're looking at the barriers. We've done a thorough review of literature, scholarly and practitioner, and these are just a snapshot of the barriers that both the private sector in terms of the supply and then the public sector in terms of the demand, all of the barriers that they experience, and there's several common to both sides, like the short-termism, lack of business models, lack of incentives, the unfamiliarity with best practice that we'll hear a little bit more about later on, and the lack of knowledge and low capacity. So there's quite a lot that's common across both sides. And then there's also market externalities. Scholarly and practitioner literature is now really recognizing that it's the market externalities and the market failures for adaptation that are driving many of these other barriers on the other side of the diagram, the outer sides of the diagram. And we've compared this to the EIB's nature report, and a lot of the barriers are similar. There's actually, these barriers do actually exist in the in financing in any aspects, but they're very acute. and very complex for adaptation. And any response like ClimateFit, we need to be aware of those barriers and how are we going to tackle those barriers in any activities that we're trying to encourage. The next slide, please. It's worth just having a quick think about what are the functions of the private sector, and financial entities are included within this in terms of adapting to climate change. We've seen about the policy landscape and the taxonomy, etc. But this really boils down to, we've developed this further from the World Economic Forum's guide in 2024, earlier this year. We talked about 3 roles, but we think it's 4. The first is, number 1, adapting to climate change in its own activities, and there's a lot of activity there. The second is doing no significant harm, so that's those very, very important from a European perspective. The third is that it can support adaptation through finance, and the fourth is that the finance sector can also support adaptation through products and services. And so in our research in this first part of the project, we've seen that the financial entities that we've engaged in, over about 40 so far, that are active in our territories, our 4 main territories that you've heard about. The climate risk assessments are being undertaken, but very little, and there's some products and services being developed, but very little financing that's flowing, and very little talk about doing no significant harm. Next slide. I won't go into very much detail here, but basically just to say that, yes, a lot of who we talk to are doing climate risk screening. It is also, the disclosure is now required from major financial entities in Europe. But what we can't assess is how far that climate risk screening is making a difference in terms of investment decisions. So in the next stages of our work, we'll be delving into a lot more detail in that. Yes, quite a lot of the FIEs that we looked at were involved in adaptation, but they were just one-off projects. And they were small in number, and they were small in scale and size. And that would mirror what's happening at the global level. The CPI in 2023 estimate that only 5% of the total climate finance is going to adaptation. And of that, less than 3% is coming from the private sector. So we would definitely say that those very low figures for adaptation and activity and financing outside of the public sector are mirrored within our sample. But there are some nuggets of best practice, and we were able to pull out champions, and we'll hear from a few of those in the latter part of our presentation. So we're looking for financial and investment entities that are basically involved in exemplary practice and are willing to share that with others. And we want to nominate them as champions in our whole climate change project. There are some state banks and national banks that are, and we'll hear again about what's happening in the Netherlands in terms of the Netherlands National Bank. And we also found that PPPs, public-private partnerships, co-investment, blended finance, a bedrock of what we want to be doing in this area to finance adaptation is very, very low, and very, very few examples, if none, in the adaptation field. The next slide, please. So what we're going to do in ClimateFit is we're mapping out the landscape, the investment landscape in each of our territories. And this is a draft that is in development. But from our research, we're mapping to see what is actually happening within that territory, because it'll be very specific. It's yes, it's driven by European legislation, but it's also driven at the local level by the national legislation, and then also by the national priorities in terms of what climate hazards are impacting within a particular territory. And you can see here in yellow, of all the possible financing and solutions, the majority of what we found is in grants and concessional funding and municipal funding. And then that's followed potentially by asset and wealth managers in investment in real estate, and then in banks, activity in some in green bonds, some in resilience mortgages. We found only one climate bond across all of our territories, and that was the Paris climate bond, which was 300 million, and a small proportion of that was allocated to adaptation in the water sector. So as with that global approach, we're finding that very much mirrored at the local level, that there is some activity, but again, we'd have to step back from it and say, is it commensurate to the risks that each of these territories are facing? And that, as we'll find out after the break, that actually the investment entities themselves and the economy more broadly will be facing. Just a quick flick through the last slide, which is, next slide, please. Basically, this is also part of our mapping. We want to look at and see who's active within the territory. So this is for Belgium and Flanders, and we've already interviewed and had detailed conversations with some of the banks and the insurance companies and the foundations. So this is crowded, but the landscape is crowded. You know, there are different financial and investment entities. They have different needs. They have different propensities to invest and different requirements for investment. And our challenge in ClimateFit is to make sense of this and bring this all together. So then very quickly, that's a quick dash through the investment landscape. So if we move to the next set of slides, and I'll just introduce very quickly, if we go past this, and if we move to the next set of slides, and we'll have a look at what ClimateFit is doing. So ClimateFit is an EU Mission Horizon project that we commenced in September last year. So we're only 8 months old. So we're just crawling at the moment. And we're in our first 2 work packages. But overall, we're responding to this urgent need to accelerate action to adapt to ongoing climate change and to scale up climate resilient investment. So we basically want to build critical insights and build up capacities of both public authorities, but also financial and investment entities. We call them FIEs. And we're keeping a broad approach to who we include as FIEs. We have our 20 territories you've heard from 4 today. Next slide, please. Yes, we want to accelerate that action and to scale up. And we're recognizing, as we've seen today from our 4 lead territories, that public budgets alone will not be able to address the financial challenge. And so funding and finance from the private sector will be necessary. And without that funding and finance, all of those territories, and our 20 territories are very representative of absolutely every single territory across the whole entire European Union will be affected in similar ways to the presentations we've had today. And we know that those hazards cannot be managed by public budgets alone. So the call is basically to look at how that funding can be maximized and leveraged, and how new sources of financing from the private sector can also be made available. Next slide. So how are we going to do this? We're going to do this by understanding the status, but very importantly for everybody today, we want to grow a network amongst PAs, investors, and other stakeholders to help us to identify the adaptation projects and identify them and scope them such that they are bankable projects that can then be considered by a variety of financial and investment entities. And hopefully we have a strong ambition that we will mobilize additional financing. And the outcome is that we want to be able to replicate the approach from our 20 territories and unlock capital across the European Union to address the adaptation finance gap, which is very large across the whole of the globe, across Europe, and across each country in Europe, and for each and every territory across Europe. One of the problems is that we haven't identified what the adaptation finance gap is. So we are not at any of those levels able yet to articulate what that finance gap is, but we're very cognizant that we have to help to identify it for our 20 territories and to talk about that and promote that in terms of a call to action and instill once that is made openly available information, that then we can instill a sense of urgency from all of the participators. So just finally, what we would like to do from today is to get you involved. Join our network either as a public authority, a financial entity, or as an enabling organisation. If you're a financial entity, just as the several that we'll hear from later today, if you've got a success story, talk to us and talk to us about becoming an FIE champion. Register for our webinars and our training and our FIE workshops throughout this year and into 2025. Join our local resilience task forces, which we'll be setting up in Belgium, France, Italy, and Romania to start off with this year. Sign up and get our newsletter. And really, we really want to work with you to grow the network, to grow knowledge, to grow awareness about this huge challenge that we all face, and ultimately to grow investment and financing. So thank you very much. Sorry about moving through those slides quite quickly, but if you want more information on ClimateFit, you can get it on our website and you can see the website results on our slides. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you for this comprehensive presentation, and thank you for staying in the time and just to rush a little bit. Thank you. So we just finalized our first part of the webinar. So I think that now we have a quite well-deserved break of 10 minutes. So now it's 11:06, so I will ask you to reconvene at 11:15, so we can move then with the second part. In the meanwhile, there is the poll in the chat, so please answer our question. See you in a while and enjoy your break. So we are back. So welcome back to our first climate fit webinar. So now let's move to the second part of our webinar, and I'm glad to introduce Kit England. Kit has graduated in law by the University of East England and holds a master in environment, politics and globalization by the King's College of London. He's passionate about sustainability with over 10 years of experience in leading and advising on transformational change in the field of mitigation and adaptation, with a specialization in cities, urban development, climate finance, system change, and climate justice. In 2023, Kit joined the Paul Wattick's Associate, where he's now work as a senior climate adaptation specialist. So Kit, I will leave the floor to you to briefly present the linkages between climate change risk, and finance. The floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chiara. I will just get my screen sharing. But yes, brilliant. So we sort of heard a lot of the big picture at the start. And what we'll do now is we'll delve down a little bit more into the detail. Now I am just sharing, here we go. So hopefully that should now be up with you. Yeah, I can see you nodding, Chiara. Right, so off we go. Right, so what I'm going to do, we're going to delve down into the detail a little bit. So we're going to raise some awareness of the impacts of physical climate risks to financing and investment entities and the financial system. So we're going to delve into UCRA a little bit there. We were lucky enough to be involved in the sort of finance storyline that Julie was mentioning earlier. We'll talk a little bit about the adaptation finance gap and the role of private sector finance. And then I'm going to share some of the sort of emerging systemic solutions that are being out there to encourage private sector finance and kind of local action and their relevance to ClimateFit as well. But it's good to start with context and the key risks. And this chart from Climate Action Tracker is one that I always put up, but it just really highlights, it shows the sort of current trajectory of warming based on the NDCs of all of the parties to the Paris Agreement. And it's really useful to remind people at the start that we're not on track to limit warming to 2 degrees or to pursue efforts to limit to 1.5 degrees as well. And the sort of green line shows you the trajectory that we need to be on, and the blue shows where we were after COP28. So we're going to experience impacts, and we know that mitigation is important, but not going fast enough. So we also need to adapt just to minimize impacts and economic losses. And climate change brings those risks, for financial institutions, for the public sector and the real economy. Those are really determined by 3 components, which we heard a little bit, which were hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. So the IPCC has this framework. But in recent years, the finance sectors also realized that the transition to a net zero economy is also a source of financial risk. And the sort of work by the financial sector has carved up climate risks into 2 categories now. So we have physical risks and we have transition risks. And transition risks are those associated with a transition to a low carbon economy, and physical risks are the ones associated with a changing climate. And those tend to be called acute, i.e. sort of sharp, like heat waves, or chronic, like things like sea level rise that happen over time. And that's what we're going to focus on today. But as we also heard as well, climate change, those risks are not, they're important, but they also interact and work together. And climate change is a systemic risk to the financial sector. And we know that because economies and financial markets are really connected across jurisdictions. And we've seen that with problems in the subprime mortgage crisis, the Greek debt crisis, and in COVID as well. And events in one country or market can lead to some volatility and risks to financial stability, which can have contagion effects or spillover effects into different sectors or into different places. So I guess what this means is that, the potential climate risks in one sector, so in the public sector, for example, could also be a problem for the financial sector and vice versa. But it's really early days in understanding and in these risks, and the sort of current approaches seriously underestimate them as well. So I'm going to delve in quickly to the UCRA, and Julie very kindly put up the sort of summary slides of UCRA around economy and finance. But the UCRA economy and finance storyline explored the risks to the public finances and the wider economy as well. And within that, the risks of climate change to financial stability are kind of low to moderate. We know that there's still going to be large economic or financial costs and important sector impacts. What we also know is that those are the kind of scoring when you think about them individually, but actually that scoring and the size of impacts and risks is higher when you take that system perspective. And there we think that those could be high in the near term and very high in the medium term. So UCRA highlights 4 significant risks to the financial sector, and those are risks to public finances, to property and insurance markets, to financial markets, and the European solidarity mechanism as well. And I'm going to give you a quick overview of all 4 of those. So the first was the risk to the public finances, and here the impacts to public finances from climate change can be direct, i.e., they arise from impacts on the public entity themselves, or indirectly via impacts elsewhere in the system, so impacts on the real economy, financial markets, etc. And those impacts have a wide range of consequences for public entities. So we already find it hard in local municipalities to finance adaptation, but actually when climate change impacts on places, it can result in reduced tax revenues, it can result in increased public spending, contingent liabilities, etc. But also, those impacts on real economy can also can translate through and make those worse as well. And these can then transmit back into financial markets and feedback, again into the public finances. So that could be about increasing borrowing costs for public entities or increased costs of capitals as well. The second was risk to financial market stability. So this is about the stability of financial markets themselves. And in this scenario, climate change impacts the financial operations of companies directly, or it cascades through the macroeconomy, public finance, or the real economy, and causes feedbacks which affect financial stability. And I think in this scenario, it's also important to say that risks also cascade in from outside the EU, so via trade or through value chains as well. There's also an important part here called the illusory truth effect, which is that actually, the belief that these kind of risks might exist actually amplify the climate risks themselves. So you might actually experience a kind of an abrupt repricing of climate risk in the real economy or in financial institutions just because sort of investors and regulators think that it might happen. But we also know that the risks are likely to be underestimated since the research is still in its infancy, and the data is actually quite hard to get at. The third was around risks to insurance markets and property portfolios. So what we see here is there's the potential for more severe and frequent events to either raise premiums or to reduce coverage. And actually, one of the sort of feedbacks effects of this is that higher premiums might feed back into suppressing demand, kind of leading to then withdrawal of products and things like that. So again, kind of something that we are worried about a little bit. And then the last one was around the risk to the viability of EU solidarity mechanisms. So one way of actually managing climate extremes in Europe is through the solidarity funding. So they, by pooling risk at the European level. And the total amount approved by the EU Solidarity Fund has been over 7.5 billion since it started in 2002. But actually, the effects of climate change actually are considered in the UCRA as a standalone risk to the solidarity mechanism. And that's because there's an increased call for funds through the solidarity mechanism. It's managed levels of climate extremes in the past, but actually there are increasing and unprecedented disasters that are increasing the calls on the solidarity fund. And the sort of current storylines work indicate that the Solidarity Fund hasn't really got enough funding in it for future impacts in Europe and overseas territories. People are starting to think about the alternatives and what is needed there, but it's likely that more action is going to be needed there as well. So that's a very brief overview of those risks directly. But we also know that financial and investment entities have a really important role to play in working at the local level to drive adaptation as well. So Stella talked a little bit about the adaptation finance gap, and it's very big. So global finance flows are up to $1.2 trillion, but it's well below what's needed. And as we've sort of recapped, only about most of that was mitigation, about 5% is adaptation, and of the adaptation, 98% is public finance. So this second chart just sort of shows you how much it sort of needs to scale to the global level. So we're talking about an exponential shift. And in terms of what that looks like for Europe, a separate project we're involved in called The Crew has done some early estimates for Europe and suggests this needs to be about 41 billion a year in Europe through to 2030 as well. And some of those results will be out later this year. But there's a strong understanding on where the solutions might lie. So this diagram's from UNEP's adaptation gap report that they put together every couple of years, and they identified 7 different solutions. Some of these are more relevant to Europe than not, but things like increasing private sector finance, increasing domestic public expenditure on adaptation, increasing financing for SMEs, all kind of really important solutions to help us get there, and also very relevant for Europe as well as globally. And as we talked about a little bit already, the challenges when it comes down to individual projects are the different barriers that are there. And this is a little slide that we did for a literature review for the UK Climate Change Committee on where the sort of barriers are, but also how important they are. So some barriers are much more important than others. And the sort of key ones are around information gaps, market failures and public goods, limited and low revenues from projects, long and uncertain paybacks, and regulation as well. So really helping to define the role of the private sector and what's expected of the private sector in adaptation. But what's really happened in the last couple of years is that there has started to be a kind of a common view about what the framework is, and Stella already presented that already. But what's really interesting is not just the messages, but also who is saying them. So that kind of 3 roles around avoided losses, new opportunities and revenues, and kind of collaboration for public action and financing the adaptation of others are coming through in lots of different places. So the UNFCCC released a report earlier this year, the World Economic Forum's there, but the World Business Council on Sustainable Development is there as well. That's really, really important. But I think one of the other things that's coming through from the transition plan space is that there's also a much kind of more maturing consideration about the timing of decisions and the timing of actions and risks. So this is a slide we did for the UK's Transition Plan Task Force, which thinks about the opportunities for the real economy on adaptation, but also from left to right kind of looks at when the types of action based on when the timing of climate risks emerge and the timing of decisions that businesses have to make. It varies by organization, but generally there's that framework emerging now, and it's really helpful to coalesce people around. And actually, again, Alessandro touched on some of these, but there are a range of emerging solutions that we think improve the local financing conditions now for regions and for local municipalities and for private sector wanting to work in them. And these are disclosures, investment planning processes, taxonomies, labs and accelerators, and new sources and instruments. So on disclosures, I won't go through too much of them, but they've had a bit of a bumpy ride. So there's a real balance here. Yes, private entities are having to disclose what their risks are and also what they're doing on adaptation. But this is happening in different ways in different jurisdictions, and it causes lots of challenges for global companies. So what you have to disclose in Europe, for example, is different to what you have to disclose in the US. And that's okay, but there's also a trade-off between decision useful information and the amount of effort that companies have to go to. And there's a big backlash kind of going on. If you look, for example, in the US, about the kind of the granularity of the reporting. And that has some particular issues for adaptation where you really need that granularity as well. But what's powerful about them is that they're an eternal lever of change. So they act as a new pressure point from investors and shareholders, but they also help governments understand where activities are not commercially viable, and informs the basis of engagement in adaptation plan developments. That's really useful. And The second area on investment planning, this is a new sort of practice that's happening in the public sector, but it has some significant relevance for the private sector, where governments and local governments are translating their high-level adaptation goals into pipelines of bankable investments. So by doing that, they go through all of the investment needs and think about where public money should be used strategically and where's the role of the private sector, because the total adaptation needs are much higher. And so the projects that are being developed in ClimateFit kind of will form part of wider pipelines in local places of their adaptation needs. This is quite interesting because it's happening at the sort of national level. So the Asian Development Bank is working across Asia, but also the OECD is working with a number of governments and nations on that process. But in Europe, as part of the Pathways to the Resilience Programme, which I'm part of, we're piloting that investment planning process with 100 different regions as part of the EU adaptation mission. So this really helps regions think much more strategically about which finance is needed for what purposes and what fiscal space they have and how they can best bring in the role of the private sector, through incentives or regulation or subsidies as well. The third is taxonomies, and we heard a little bit about this from Alessandra too, and they help define what adaptation investment is. Now, this is also rapidly emerging, and this map here shows you the kind of range of different places across the world that have different taxonomies, and they all have slightly different criteria. But they're also very helpful because they have a wide range of use cases. So they can help disclosures, but they can also apply to new investment projects, products, and also financial policy making and budgeting as well. One of the challenges for adaptation taxonomies has been the context-specific nature of adaptation. So what is effective or a substantial contribution in one place may not be a substantial contribution in others. But actually some of the interesting innovations around addressing this, one is by UNDRR, KPMG and Standard Chartered, where they start to look at the kind of alignment with local or regional or national plans to address that challenge as well. The fourth was around finance labs. So there are a range of global programs now developing new financial models, sources and instruments. They've mainly been around a developing country focus to date, and we reviewed a kind of a global set of them for Pathways to Resilience. But what we find is that there's a significant focus on the land and agriculture and adaptation sort of SMEs sector, but there's less on water, health and well-being as well. In Pathways to Resilience, we'll be establishing an adaptation finance innovation lab for Europe later this year. And we're also planning to update this slide as part of the UNEP adaptation gap report to give a much better picture. There's a few extra accelerator programs we'll be adding into the scope as well. But these are really helpful because they translate into new sources and instruments. And new sources and instruments are notoriously difficult to get off the ground. But there's a whole range of different bright spots, and I won't go through all of these in detail because of time, but we're seeing, a whole range of different instruments which are bringing in new sources as well. So whether that's citizens directly through crowdfunding. In the international space, debt for climate swaps are gaining traction, but there's a relevance there potentially between the national and the subnational level, for example. There's also parametric insurance and weather-linked instruments as well. So the kind of gaps between claims and payments and insurance is dropping. There's also things like insurance-linked infrastructure financing, so generating new incentives, and resilience credits as well, although there's some issues there with monitoring and evaluation as well. So I guess the takeaway messages here are that climate change is a significant financial risk, both directly, but also through the wider real economy and the public sector. But FIEs are also part of the solution. They have a significant role to play, adapting their own operations, but also financing products and services. And there's a whole raft of innovations that are out there that, are kind of helping develop the right enabling environment. But I think it's important to say they're not yet leading to the significant uplift in financing. So there's work to do. And I think ClimateFit is a brilliant opportunity to get involved with us on co-designing some of those bankable solutions. So I'll stop there and I'll hand back to you, Chiara. I hope that's okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you very much for this comprehensive and inspiring presentation. And thank you again for stick to the assigned time. Very, very appreciated. So now let's move to the next topic. So on the meanwhile, please respond to the poll just launched. And also I would kindly remind you that it's possible to write your question to our speakers in the question and answer box. So let's move to the next topic on best practices to finance climate resilience by Thomas Machiels. You already know him, and his colleague Varnika Srivastava. Varnika finished her master in sustainable development from CLIMATEFIT in 2021. And she mainly worked in coastal management and marine governance and also in the field of digital sustainability. Since September 2023, she's part also of our ClimateFit project, and she was involved in the research on adaptation case studies with alternative funding or finance schemes, and also in the activity to assist public authorities in developing public projects in Europe. So, Thomas Varnika, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chiara, for introducing us. So, brief background about what we're doing here. So, we are researching international practices of innovative solutions to climate adaptation finance. At the University of Antwerp, we composed for ClimateFit a database that includes around 250 international examples of climate adaptation financing solutions that include private capital. We selected 20 cases that we are researching in depth and for which reports will be available for the summer, from the summer onwards. And today we will briefly present 3 of those 20 cases. The first case study that I will present is Cloudburst Management Plan in Copenhagen, which is an example of co-financing climate adaptation with public funding, water tariffs, and private financing. So a bit of context first. So in 2011, the Danish capital, Copenhagen, suffered from a cloudburst, the equivalent of a 1,000-year storm event, causing the city to flood in less than 2 hours, and it caused about 1.2 billion euros of damage. Based on IPCC climate change projections, precipitation during the winter will increase and precipitation during the summer will be more extreme, but will decrease overall. And therefore, there is an increasing risk of flooding and urban heat island effects in Copenhagen. Now, by 2011, Copenhagen already finished its climate adaptation plan, followed by the Cloudburst Management Plan in 2011, or CMP for short. And CMP embodies a comprehensive restructuring of the drainage system by combining underground gray infrastructure drainage tunnels with large-scale green-blue infrastructure surface projects, and also obligations for private property owners to flood-proof their properties. CMP includes more than 300 projects with a total estimated cost of 1.9 billion euros, and each year the municipal council selects 15 projects that are then initiated and implemented. Kit, I think your microphone is still on, so I hear you talking on your keyboard. If you can mute yourself, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, so moving on with the Cloudburst Management Plan. So the city had limited resources to cover the costs of surface measures in public areas and streets, and looked towards the water utility company HOFOR to co-finance projects by using water tariffs that they levied from Copenhagen citizens. Now, the barrier here was that the Danish water sector law prohibited utility companies from investing in multifunctional stormwater systems, such as surface measures that include green-blue infrastructure, because these include parts that are not directly related to water provision and water treatment, and because the water utility does not own or manage above-ground assets. So simply put, above-ground investments are traditionally the responsibility of the municipality, while the water utility company is responsible for the sewer and water treatment systems that are underground. Now, city officials and politicians in Copenhagen lobbied with the national level, and eventually the water sector law was changed. And from that point onwards, project delivery and maintenance costs that are related to water management can also be financed by the utility company HOFOR by levying water tariffs or additional water tariffs from citizens, regardless if these projects are above or underground. All other costs not related to water treatment are carried by the municipality, And this legal change applies to all Danish municipalities. Now, this figure helps to explain what the boundaries are of each stakeholder's financial responsibility in CMP. So the red dots entail flood-proofing measures on private properties, which are the responsibility of private property owners. And the green dots are project elements that HOFOR is allowed to fund, because these are stormwater management measures for the city's drainage system and handling wastewater, even if they are above ground. And these are financed from an increase in the citizens' water tariffs and comprehend around 58% of the plan's total cost. And finally, the purple dot are project design elements that are not HOFOR's core tasks, for example, tree and green planting, that also serves an aesthetic or public space improvement purpose. And these must be paid for by the municipality, and the municipality finances its share, which is around 10.5% of the total cost of the plan. It finances these with loans from the Kommunenkredit, which is a Danish special purpose credit institution that provides loans at attractive rates for Danish municipalities and regions. So it's a form of concessional finance. Now, 4 main conditions led to the successful implementation of CMP so far. First, there was a good partnership internally between different city departments and also between the city and the water utility company HOFOR. Second, resources were available to quantify the water retention capacity and the economic benefits in terms of avoided damage costs of the projects. And this was necessary to prove that in some instances, green-blue infrastructure is more efficient or more cost-efficient than traditional gray infrastructure. A third condition is that there was political support at the local level, which helped to lobby for changes to the water sector law on a national level. And these legal changes were then the fourth and final condition that enabled co-financing for green-blue infrastructure by HOFOR. But on the other hand, limitations and challenges of CMP are, first off, the fact that the quantification of co-benefits of green-blue infrastructure are not allowed to be considered in a project's cost-benefit analysis. So they're only allowed to consider economic benefits, but not societal co-benefits. And also important to know is that developing and managing a plan of this scale requires a heavy workload from the public administration, which requires resources that may not be present in smaller municipalities. And for that reason, Copenhagen is the only municipality in Denmark so far that benefited from this national legal change regarding the water sector law. So the second case is Groenfonds Midden-Delfland. So Groenfonds translated as Green Fund. It's an example of how to use developer obligations in a defensive investment fund to pay farmers for delivering green services, which is then considered a form of payment for ecosystem services. Now, a bit of context again. First, in the Netherlands, a lot of agricultural green areas have landscape elements that possess important cultural, historical, and ecological values. And the same goes for Midden-Delfland, a green area west of Rotterdam that is mainly owned and used by dairy farmers. And long-term maintenance is required here to safeguard and protect green area values. But the problem is that structural finance and long-term finance is often lacking. Since 1977, the dairy farmers are responsible for maintaining valuable landscape elements in Midden-Delfland, but it never became a legal obligation. So consequently, a lot of farmers do not have the resources or the time to voluntarily maintain the valuable landscape in their agricultural areas, and also because the dairy industry in this area is a very difficult and competitive business. Now, to ensure long-term maintenance of this area's agricultural lands, in 2005, 4 municipalities created Groenfonds or Green Fund as a non-profit public benefit institution or a foundation with 2 objectives. First, maintaining the agricultural cultural landscape, including valuable landscape and ecological elements. And second, strengthening the relationship between city and countryside through recreation and education. And the Green Fund collects financing from real estate, including residential and industrial real estate developments through developer obligations under the banner of nature compensations. And those developer obligations are then defensively invested, and the return on capital from those investments are used to pay dairy farmers for delivering green services. And green services in this case include landscape maintenance and facilitating recreation and education. Now, because Groenfonds is a foundation, it must have a board with at least 3 members. And in this case, the board has 1 member from each of the 4 participating municipalities, being Midden-Delfland, Delft, Maasluis, and The Hague. And board members are municipality aldermen, which means that the composition of the board can changes or can change every time local elections take place. There are also 2 officials that take the role of treasurer and secretary, and they are paid by the 4 municipalities. Now, the actual setting up and execution of the payment system for delivering green services is subcontracted to the Agricultural Nature Association Vokestaat, which has been active in the area since 1999. And the dairy farmers, on their hand, can participate through 6-year contracts during which they choose which green services they wish to perform. Now, the financial model of the Green Fund is composed of 4 parts, as seen on this figure. The first part on the top left side, is a one-time financial contribution from the participating municipalities at the start of Groen Fonds in order to have a starting budget. The second and the largest part are continuous contributions from residential and industrial developments through developer obligations. And together, the initial municipal contributions and developer contributions flow into a fund, and they are then defensively invested, so meaning invested in assets with low investment risk. These are invested by an asset manager, which is part 3 of the financial model on the top right side. And the return on capital or the interest rates from those investments flows back into the Green Fund, and these are used to pay participating dairy farmers for delivering green services, which is the 4th part of the model, and which can be interpreted as a form of payment for ecosystem services. Now, it was written in the statutes of the foundation from the start that only the return on capital from these investments can be used to reimburse green services. Incomes from developer obligations can only be used directly to pay for green services if the investment profits are insufficient. And this way through the system, the fund grows steadily each year and becomes less and less dependent of developer obligations. Important for the success of Groen Fonds is the local knowledge of the Agricultural Nature Association of Vokestaat, who already knew the farmers before the establishment of Green Fund. A second success factor is the fact that Green Fund was initiated as a foundation under existing legal framework, so it did not require legal changes. And third, because Green Fund is a foundation, the objectives are written and fixed in its statutes, which ensures sustainability because it requires a majority vote to change the objectives. And finally, because developer obligations are first invested and not directly used to pay green services, there is some sort of a financial sustainability of the fund that grows every year. And the voluntary character on the side of the limitations and challenges, so it's voluntary for farmers to participate, it's not mandatory, but this could become a limitation because we see that a lot of retiring small dairy farmers their companies are being sold to large agricultural companies that may be less interested in participating in this scheme. And this could be solved. They're not doing it right now, but this could be solved by tying the contracts to the land instead of to the company, ensuring that the contract is transferred if the land or the company is purchased by another company. And I gladly pass on the word to my colleague Varnika to present you the final case.
Thank you, Thomas. Sorry to interrupt, just to remind you that there are a couple of minutes left. So if you can speed up, thank you.
Okay, sure. I will briefly present the hydro bond then, if you could go to the next slide. So the Vivera Acqua Hydro Bond operates in the Veneto region of Italy since 2014, and it is an innovative financial approach that aims to secure long-term financing for water infrastructure. The reason why this was introduced is because Veneto suffers from a lot of aging and broken water infrastructure, so broken pipes, and it is also difficult to transport water through these pipes in the hilly regions of Veneto, which are facing drought-like conditions. Because of that, the water utilities of Veneto needed to secure long-term financing. If we could just go to the next slide. So the hydro bond is made up of a consortium of 12 water utilities that operate in the Veneto region. And in this entire structure, they issued 8 mini bonds, which were then pooled together. The total value of these mini bonds over a 10-year period has been around 623 million euros. And in after the mini bonds were introduced, they were bundled from time to time into an asset-backed security to attract broader investment. As you can see, this structure of the mini bonds, it aims to achieve two key goals. First, of course, is to secure long-term financing for the water infrastructure, but the second is also to reduce the administrative burdens on participating municipalities, which is why a streamlined process was extremely necessary for this one. Since we are short on time, I won't go into too many details. The hydro bond structure is basically divided into two phases. So the first phase was then issuing the mini bonds. The second phase was the introducing of a special purpose vehicle, which was the Vivera Aqua Hydro Bond SRL. If you can go to the next slide. So this shows the contractual structure behind the asset-backed securitization, which was also involved in the phase 2 of the project. The SPV of Vivera Aqua Hydro Bond, it acquired the mini bonds that were issued by the corporations in phase 1. And these mini bonds then served as the underlying collateral for an asset-backed securitization. This ABS also had a longer maturity date compared to the mini bonds. And this longer maturity date, it accounts for potential delays in the mini bond repayment schedule. The amortization plan of the ABS mirrors the amortization schedule of the mini bonds, and the weighted average life of the mini bonds is 12 years. As you can imagine, because we are talking about water utilities, the water bills that are collected over a 20-year period will be used to repay the hydro bond. If you can go to the next slide. So I'll jump straight into the important enabling conditions and successes. The hydro bond is a very good example of consortiums. Even though the utilities that were involved in the hydro bond are not public authorities, it is a very good example of how how small and medium-sized utilities can come together to achieve a broader financing goal. One of the most critical steps that also makes it a success was presenting the risk-sharing element to the shareholders. The hydro bond is a good example of how to transparently communicate a portion of the bond proceeds and how they will be retained by the SPV. This was a big part of the process. The ABS securitization process, it pooled the risks across multiple water utilities, and it made the overall investment less susceptible to defaults from one single issuer. Another thing is that the bonds have a longer maturity date of 20 years, and this is enough time for the water infrastructure to be up and running, and it's the exact time period that the utilities require for that. The main limitation and challenge is that this is a very new process, especially in the climate adaptation landscape of Italy. People like the water utilities involved as well as the public authorities involved didn't really know what pooling mini bonds means or what the green bonds are. Because of that, there was some extra resources from their side that were needed to navigate this complicated process. The other small hurdle that they faced is that there was a 6 million guarantee that was provided by a regional development agency that acted as a buffer against potential defaults by participating water utilities. Of course, this reduced the risk for investors, but it also created a situation in which public money was used to guarantee private investment. That's all. I tried to be as succinct as possible. And if you have any questions, please write them in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Varnika. Thank you, Thomas. And so we are now moving to the final part of our webinar. There is the last question of the poll now running. So let's move now to the inspirational thoughts of our ClimateFit climate finance champions. So the first one will be Felix van Veldhoven. Felix is a climate risk and adaptation expert at the Climate Adaptation Service in Netherlands since 2018. He has a background in urban geography and regional planning at the University of Utrecht and holds a master in heritage studies. He has worked in over 8 megacities across the globe, conducting climate risk assessment and co-producing adaptation policy. He also supported international business, gaining expertise in climate finance, including engaging businesses and governments in climate resilience. So, Felix, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chiara, for the kind introduction. And also thank you so much, Stella, for inviting me here today. It's a big honor. So the next 10 minutes I'll spend to share some lessons from the Dutch real estate sector, where we work together with the public and private sector to establish a level playing field for physical climate risk assessments for real estate portfolios. So my name is Felix van Veldhoven. I work at Climate Adaptation Services, or CAS. We're a small not-for-profit based in the Netherlands, and we're mainly responsible for these two tools. So it's the Dutch Climate Impact Atlas, which offers free and open data on the impact of climate change in our country. And the other one is the Adaptation Knowledge Portal. That's a one-stop shop for professionals working on adaptation in the country. Now, first, to set the scene here with a figure from the European Environment Agency that Julie also presented about, of course. So in changing climate, intensity and frequency of climate-related disasters, like the ones shown here, they're increasing, leading to higher risk in the absence of adaptation. And so the figure shows for the last year, 2022, an economic loss of over 50 billion euros. And according to the estimates, less than 20% of all these losses were insured. Of course, there are many differences between the countries. It was also mentioned by Paul earlier. And one could argue that within the financial sector, the real estate sector is most exposed to these kinds of risks, as real estate assets typically cannot be moved. So to move on, we've been working on this topic since 2018. And so we got many questions also from abroad, from real estate investors and managements, asking us the question if they should invest in the Netherlands, if they should, for example, invest in a hotel based in Rotterdam. And so we came across many of these kinds of images that were developed by often commercial service providers that use global data on, for example, coastal flood risk. And as you can see, the Netherlands is often in the red zone. And so the question is this accurate? Right? And so this worries many of these real estate investors. But so the question is this an accurate depiction of the risk in the Netherlands? And so for an answer on that one, I'd like to show this slide where you can see that it's really crucial to also take into account the fact that many regions are protected against flooding. So by dikes or levees, and especially the Netherlands, of course. And so if you ignore these kinds of protection measures, many of these global scale, large scale flood risk assessments tend to overestimate the risk. And so the image shows on the right-hand side what the image looks like when you take flood protection standards into account. So in this case, it's based on a global database of flood protection standards developed by IVMVU of VU Amsterdam. And so it also shows the importance of the Dutch flood protection program. So that has the aim of all primary flood defenses to comply with very strict standards towards 2050. And also the Netherlands has this Delta fund that has an annual budget of over 1 billion a year. And so that guarantees sustainable funding for flood risk management. So this links to a project that we were involved in before, the CLIMATEFIT project, where we work together with the I4C and CISO and other partners across Europe. In the center is the final report published in 2021. And so some of the key outcomes are on the slide. So first one, that many of the financial organizations we work with lack climate change expertise. The second one, that there's a large number of commercial service providers that offer global scale physical climate risk assessments. And on the right-hand side, you can also see this figure with the steep increase in startups that offer these services. And the third and last one, which is the one I would like to focus on, is that there's often limited correlation of different commercial providers of climate risk assessments, which is a challenge. And so this is also been published in literatures on the left-hand side from Nature Communications. It describes this issue of the black box, where methodologies and the data used by commercial providers of these assessments remain in the black box, so with limited transparency. And on the right-hand side from the sector itself. And so it's very difficult then to compare the outcomes of different assessments. And so that was also what was concluded by APG, which is one of the world's largest pension investors. We worked together with them, and so they compared 3 different providers that you can see on the slide here. And so what it clearly shows, in this case for sea level rise, what was one of the hazards that these providers looked at, is that there are many differences between the outcomes, between the risk scores that they assigned. And so their question was, which one should we pick? Because if we pick provider 1, the score is much higher than if we pick number 2. Now, this is a big challenge also in light of the EU legislation that was also presented about earlier, right? So from 2024 onwards, many companies, listed companies and large enterprises have to comply with these regulations, will have to disclose their physical climate risk and have to carry out a robust climate risk and vulnerability assessment. And so the question is how, of course. Now that as to set the scene, and so I'd like to focus on this example from the Netherlands, which is this framework for climate adaptive buildings, was developed by the Dutch Green Building Council. And actually it was co-developed with well, a large consortium. You can see it on the screen here, many businesses, knowledge institutes, consultants. And so it's an interesting example, I think, of blended finance, where private sector parties also contributed and chipped in to develop this level playing field for physical climate risk assessment. Because this is based on open data, it's fully transparent, free to download and use, and it well, explains how you can carry out a physical climate risk assessment for a real estate portfolio in the Netherlands. In a nutshell, it does 3 steps. First one is look at the direct surroundings of an asset, taking national level free and open climate data into account. The second one looks at the building, and so at its vulnerability, and so taking building specific properties into account. That leads to a climate risk score, and then you can take a look at measures. So what can you do about the risk? Just to give you one example, in this case, pluvial flooding, and this is a photo from last weekend from the south of the Netherlands, where we had bad flooding in Limburg caused by extreme rainfall. And so we would use maps like these ones that are free and open, and you can download the data to assess the exposure to these kinds of extreme rainfall events, and then the flooding resulting from that. In the second step, you would take a look at building-specific properties, like do you have vulnerable installations in the basement, or what are other inflow openings, and so on. Now, to conclude, I would also like to highlight this European project called Reach Out, where, for example, CMCC is also involved in, where we work together with 7 different city hubs developing climate services. And in Amsterdam, we also work on physical climate risk assessment for the real estate sector, again with APG and some other organizations. And IVM VU, University from Amsterdam, they developed this free and open tool called REACT, with the aim of enhancing comparability of the resulting assessments. It uses free and open EU-level climate data. It maintains its transparency about the methods used in the data. Well, you put in water depths for different return periods and also flood protection levels. As I mentioned, that's really important when you think about flood risk. And as you can see on the slide, the output is expected annual damage. And so this is implemented in an Excel tool aimed for at users from the real estate sector. So here's my final slide. If you're interested in using this tool, yeah, you can check it out here through the URL. It's been published. It has been tested by APG and AEW as real estate organizations. And so we're interested in exploring opportunities to scale up this idea of establishing a level playing field for physical climate risk assessment. So if you have ideas, please reach out. Back to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Felix, for your presentation. So now let's move to the next speaker from this time from Italy. So we have now Dario Mangilli. Dario is the head of sustainability and member of the Sustainability Committee at Impact SGR. His main focus is on exploring how to accelerate investment in mitigation and adaptation solution. So Dario, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'll be sharing my screen, so please tell me if you can see it.
Yes, if you can put it in. Yes, now it's fine, please.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so I think that I would like with a bit of a context first. So some of the points have already been very thoroughly already explained in previous speeches. So I'll start directly from who we are and why we now have concentrated our entire R&D budget on building adaptation resilience investment advisory capabilities for both listed and unlisted investments. As said before, Europe is warming twice as fast as any other continent on the globe, and also from a Southern European perspective, within Europe, Southern Europe is the part of this region where the speed of the warming is even more and even greater. So at the same time, we see that adaptation investment is still basically, as explained very well before, primarily a public finance issue rather than having been integrated in a systemic way into also capital allocation for investment strategies with a financial first rationale. On a yearly basis, the liability losses for insurance now regularly exceed 100 billion. And yet, in spite of the great urgency that is needed, a recent survey by Jefferies, investment banking, actually pointed out that there isn't any either ETF or mutual fund in the listed capital market space that has in its title the name adaptation or resilience. So just to confirm further what had already been pointed out about the lack of understanding right now in a systemic way on how to scale up private investments in adaptation resilience solutions. So what we do, basically we are a Milan-based asset management company specialized in designing, managing financial first listed impact investing solutions. And the idea to now concentrate our product innovation strategy on adaptation and investment advisory capabilities is that because we see a great need to play a role as a climate knowledge broker in the for the financial industry as a whole. So the point from where we start is what's the main language that is easily understood by the financial services industry, and the obvious answer was that financial materiality is bound to be the key lever from our perspective for brokering the climate knowledge to asset managers, banks, insurance companies, and corporates in a way that is decision useful and decision ready at the same time. So the framework that we have been, two frameworks that we have been developing over the last few months are two-pronged. On one side, we focus on adaptation and resilience readiness assessment. And on the other side, we focus on our adaptation resilience opportunity assessment. We think that the reason why it is worth concentrating on the financial materiality dimension, it is not because this is the only relevant perspective, but it's because this is this is a perspective that is more easily understood and digestible from the key decision makers involved in investment decision making and capital allocation decisions. On the first leg of this two-pronged framework, we focused on then on some specific risks that we believe are more easily understandable to the main client types that we have been targeting. The first one is obviously the uninsurability risk, that is definitely on the rise. And interestingly, in the European climate risk assessment report that was published like last month and was like presented in one of the earlier speeches, it emerged also that the uninsurability risk is on the rise, and it has already been causing some consequences in a specific region in northern France, for example, where an entire area has already been declared by insurance companies. So we think that measuring in a monetary terms the uninsurability risk is something that is definitely in line with the kind of like rationale that usually drives business decision making and investment decision making. The second key risk is geographic concentration risk, particularly having had discussions with local banks. We have realized that there is still a lack of understanding about the degree of exposure to the main hazards that are going to characterize the climate scenarios at the local level going forward. And so if a bank has a lot of exposure in terms like loans or mortgages to a given region, it is definitely financially material information for the bank to know what is in the area, the sub area that has the greatest exposure to specific types of hazard. Then going forward, there is like asset impairment, destruction and risk, asset depreciation and repricing risk, supply chain disruption risk, and productivity loss risk, as well as business discontinuity risk. The approach, the different lenses that we have adopted are on one side hazard specific, and we adopted a cumulative approach in the sense that we want to be able to specify to the counterparty the main hazards to which a given investment is exposed, and then also to calculate in monetary term to what extent what's the potential overall loss that a given company or a given bank may incur. Risk assessment need to be obviously business sector specific and concept specific, but these are elements that have already been thoroughly addressed before. On the instead adaptation resilience opportunity assessment side, our approach has drawn upon different frameworks that are out there. I fully agree, and we are a great supporter of the EU taxonomy, but unfortunately the EU taxonomy, as it has been designed so far, does not have a degree of granularity that is enough to screen investment opportunities at the solution level. And it is definitely great to have already a taxonomy, also an adaptation, but if you take a look at the economic activities that fall in that contribute to exclusively to the adaptation objective in the EU taxonomy framework, they are very broad and they cannot be applied at the investment investment level in order to pursue an adaptation resilience focused investment strategy. And this aspect is also confirmed by the fact that when you measure the degree of the taxonomy alignment of most of the listed companies in Europe, a very small and marginal percentage of this overall taxonomy alignment derives from adaptation. Most of it is derived from mitigation. How do we approach the assessment of adaptation resilience opportunity? We differentiate between two different types of solutions. On one side, climate intelligence solutions, which are solutions that allow to identify, measure, and assess exposure to physical climate risks, for example. And so there are solutions that can inform investment decision making and price climate risk into investment decision making in a way that it is not done systematically right now, because this kind of risk is not, from our understanding, systematically priced into investment decision making. And an example could be climate physical risk analytics software, for example. On the other side, the other perspective that we adopt when selecting investment opportunities with a focus on adaptation and resilience is to instead look at concretely what are the technologies and products that on a tangible level can contribute to address and mitigate the exposure to physical risk and to physical climate impacts. On a final note, the key elements though that characterize our approach to these adaptation and resilience advisory service is that it is based on a strategic partnership with a highly specialized technology providers that offer physical risk analytics software, and they do so by providing asset level and sub-asset level data for adaptation resilience readiness assessment. And this kind of assessment can be applicable to both listed and unlisted companies. We believe that this aspect is key. It has been also highlighted in a previous speech by Felix, where there may be divergence when you look at the data from on physical risk provided by different physical risk data providers. But at the same time, we believe that some of them really are out there with a very significant high quality physical risk analytics products right now. And so we have been building relationship with some of them, but we believe that have very nice products on this. We have adopted a revenue-based and sector-specific A&R investment opportunity screening, so as to be able to support also private investment asset managers in selecting opportunities at the sectoral level with a focus on specific adaptation resilience solutions. And finally, the position that we have chosen is a position like a market positioning that is based on a high degree of customization and tailoring of A&R investment advisory solutions, because we think that like the underlying data are there, but that they need to be declined. They need to be articulated in a way that is understandable for different client types that we target. And we have been seeing that the same kind of information, when delivered in different ways, can be much more effective in then integrating the climate risk information into capital allocation decisions. On a final note, the approach that we have adopted is obviously a collaborative approach in this stage, and we'll be happy to collaborate with anyone who will be interested in taking forward this role of climate broker role, because we think that the main barrier right now to scaling private investment into adaptation solution is knowledge, and knowledge should be delivered in a way that is easy to understandable for final users of this knowledge in order to scale investments. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dario. So let's move to the final speech. So we have now Gijs Kloek. Gijs Kloek is a senior manager actuarial on climate change and international affairs at Achmea. Gijs is graduated in the economic field and has an extensive background and experience on investment, reinsurance, business development, and catastrophe risk analysis in the Netherlands. Over the past years, Gijs started dedicating attention to the climate change matter, where he now performs as senior manager, having joined this Dutch insurance company, one of the largest in the Netherlands, in 1994, and as chair of the working group on climate adaptation of the Dutch Sustainable Finance Platform. So Gijs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chiara. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm chair of the working group on climate adaptation, and this working group is part of the Sustainable Finance Platform in the Netherlands. This is an organization set up by the Dutch Central Bank together with a few ministries and branch organizations and large associations like the Insurance Association. And there are different working groups, and in the working groups, there are different financial institutions work together. And in our working group, we also work together with the government. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yes. Now you might think that sustainable finance is a new phenomenon, but in 1624, there was a large flood in the Netherlands. It was a dike breach of a large river, and main area in the western part of the Netherlands was flooded. And the repair of the dike was financed through a perpetual bond. And one of those bonds still exists. It's owned by the New York Stock Exchange. And in December, there will be the next coupon payment paid by the Water Board to the New York Stock Exchange. This is the oldest bond in the world. Next, please. So what we have done as a working group, we have written a report on what's the effect of climate change and fiscal climate risk and the effects of climate adaptation on the financial sector, but also what can be our contribution to climate adaptation as a financial sector. And we have published this report and handed it over to the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. And at the beginning of this year, we've started with the implementation of the recommendations. And I'll tell you a bit more about that. Next, please. So what we have done in the report, we had made two subgroups. The first one looked at what is the effect of climate adaptation on the financial sector. This is the outside-in approach. And there are 4 trends in the Netherlands. It's getting warmer, it's getting drier, it's getting wetter, and sea levels are rising. And for all those trends, it's looked at different sectors, so the built environment, agriculture, industry, and transport. What are the effects on the economy on those sectors, and what are the indirect effects on insurance and investments and financing? Next, please. But we also can influence climate adaptation, and the government also do that. So the government is doing stress tests, communicate about climate adaptation, build in financial incentives, for example, in tax. They invest in climate adaptation, and they implement regulation. And in a similar way, financial institutions do also risk analysis. They inform their clients, build in price incentives, for example, premium differentiation for insurance. They finance, and they have conditions in their products. Next, please. So what are our conclusions? It's important. We cannot afford to wait, but climate adaptation also brings opportunities. The exchange of knowledge and data is essential, and we also need broader collaboration. And most important, financial institutions can support their customers in climate adaptation. Next, please. So we have made different recommendations, and the recommendations are to the financial institutions, so to ourselves, but also to the government and to companies. And I'll show you a few examples. Next, please. So what's very important is that there will be more clarity on where and how to build. And the Dutch government is also working on that, so that's very good. And they introduced a new framework recently where with the map different areas. So we have green zones, yellow, orange, and red, and purple in between. And the red zones are not suitable to build. The green zones are okay, and there are some colors in between. So it is suitable unless, or it is not suitable unless, or it is suitable if. In that way, it is defined. And there is also a new benchmark for areas that are prone to flood risk or to drought, how you could build and what measures you could take. And what we recommend is also to make these measures compulsory from a legal perspective. And we also want, as an insurance sector, think about to give advice to governments how to do it, how to build, and what are implications for insurance or financing. Next, please. Was also mentioned by Felix is the framework for climate adaptive building, and that's an important first step because it shows the characteristics of buildings, how to make them climate adaptive. But we also recommend the government to introduce a climate label. Some other countries already have a climate label, but in the Netherlands it doesn't exist. But what we think it can help to stimulate preventive measures, and also for people who buy a house, that they are aware of the climate risks. And that is important to build in the right incentives. And the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management is already thinking about a water label, and we recommend to make it broader, to also look at foundation risk, heat stress, and also to build in a perspective for action. So if people know what can get a better label if they take the right preventive measures, that would really incentivize the right action. And we would like to add information on insurability, that if you buy a house, that you know if the risk can be insured or not. Next, please. As mentioned also by Felix, Netherlands is well protected for flood risk, but we had a large flood in 1953, and after that, all type of flood risk was excluded from insurance coverage. First step to add the coverage was a bit more than 20 years ago by the addition of fluvial flood. And recently, most insurance have also added the smaller floods. You see on the map on the right side an example of the province of South Holland, with cities like Rotterdam and The Hague. And we have different type of dikes. We have the primary flood defenses are the red lines, and they protect for flood from the sea or the large rivers. And these are very important. They are strong, but if it goes wrong, then the loss could be enormous. It could be more than 10 billion euro. And that's too large for the insurance sector. So those risks can't be insured. And but the insurance association is talking to the government, have made different proposals for public-private partnerships or other solutions, because now there is a law that defines that there is compensation after event, but it's not clear in advance how much will be compensated. And what we recommend is to get more clarity, and also that the insurance sector will be the one-stop shopping counter for all type of flood risks, and that only in a very large event, by dike breach of the primary flood defenses, the government will pay or pay a large part of the loss, and the smaller dikes, As you can see, the gray lines on the map, those are the canals or the smaller rivers that is already covered by most insurance companies. Next, please. Another important problem is the foundations problem in the Netherlands, especially in the western part where there are peat and clay areas. There's risk of subsidence. You can see here a picture of the city of Gouda in the center of the Netherlands, where you can see that old houses, those are not built on piles, and they have subsidence risk, and that also can lead to water damage. But there are also houses built on wooden piles, but wooden piles can rot. So for the wooden piles, it's important that the groundwater levels are high, but for the risks that the houses that are not built on piles, they sink. So they would like to have low groundwater levels, and that makes the whole situation complex. And there are houses privately owned, so they often are financed through a mortgage, but there are also houses that are rental houses. But to find a solution, it would be good to look at the whole part of the area and the whole part of the city for one good solution. And we think about to play a role as a financial sector to finance the problems, because the risks are not insurable, as it is a gradual, the foundation problems is a gradual development and goes slowly. And it's not very clear when the problems have started. So it should be paid by the homeowner, but there is also a fund from the government to finance it, and this fund is being improved at the moment. Also, the Insurance Association and the Dutch Association of Banks participate in that, and we want to improve those kind of solutions. Next, please. So what's next? Now we are active in communication about our plan. We want to follow up with the recommendations. There are more recommendations, as I've shown, but those were just a few examples. We want to start pilots, pilots to for experimenting with different solutions, and to show what is possible, and hopefully if a pilot is successful, then it can be implemented in more areas, more cities, or more in the complete more parts of the Netherlands. So this is what we are working on, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Gis, for this presentation. So finally, let's move to the final part. We are a little bit late, but I will kindly ask you to stay because we are now delving into the Q&A session. So before going to the questions to our speakers, I kindly ask my colleagues if they can support me in showing the results of the poll, so we can rapidly go into the results. Okay, is it possible to share the results on the screen? Is it?
I get it, yeah. And actually, I think that the participants are actually seeing the
great.
the results.
Okay.
At least I'm seeing it.
Okay, no, great. Okay, so let's go to the first one. So regarding the UCRA, so is the financial sector in the EU fit to cope with the increasing risk from climate change? Actually, we were not so optimistic in responding to this question, because according to the majority, the answer is no. So the sector has insufficient understanding on the impact of climate change, so much work is needed. So if we can move to the second one. I think it's take a little bit. Okay, now, so what would you like to see changed in the investment landscape to encourage more adaptation financing activities? So we have couple, so I think the most voted is on financing instrument and mechanisms suited to adaptation finance, also better impact measurement, also more information, advice, and guidance on adaptation, and actually the important also on the need to regulatory change. So let's move to the third one. Okay, so regarding the financial gap, so which of the 5 areas of emerging solution do you feel needs the most extra effort in Europe? For sure, investment planning processes, new sources, and instrument are the 2 most voted, but then followed by taxonomy, labs, and accelerator, and finally disclosure. So if we can go to the last question, and then we can move to the questions. So on the best practice, do you believe at least one of these financial models is applicable in your territory? Yeah, we have good news now. Yes, the answer is yes, it is relevant, but not all conditions are present, because I can imagine it needs to be tailored to the different condition. So thank you for participating in the pool. So we have already a couple of questions. So I don't know if Julie from EA is, okay, Julie, I can see you. Okay, so the first one is for you about UCRA. How has the UCRA report been received by the various stakeholders so far?
Yeah, it's a very relevant question. So we have a number of key stakeholders involved, actually many stakeholders, but one of the key stakeholders are the EU institutions. And for the EU institutions, we have in the first place reached the European Commission very well, because they have, the day after publishing our UCRA report, they have published a communication on managing climate risks. Secondly, we have targeted the European Parliament. We have presented UCRA in the Parliament, in the plenary debate, it has been discussed, and also separately in the Environment Committee. And then it has been well perceived by the Council of the European Union. It has been presented already, we already presented in the Environment Council. We presented in the Working Party on Energy, the Working Party on Environment. Then we presented in the Working Party of Tourism. And next we are going to present in the Working Party on Industry. And there are also negotiations about the working, it's not a working party, but there is a group of financial institutions at the European level. I don't know exactly what's the name of this. And then there is a lot of uptake in the Belgian presidency. So they're really putting forward adaptation in their presidency. And so we have presented in the number of events related to the presidency on resilience. And next, of course, one of our other stakeholders are the countries. So the member states of EU, but also our member states of the EEA, which are broader than the EU. And there we have close collaborations with our network by our IONET network. And so we are also engaging them in the discussions. And soon we will also start launching a process to involve them more and to get their input on the process. Next to the countries, we also involve other stakeholders, like all our research institutes that have been actively part of UCRA. And there, for all these input, we are starting a reflection process where we gather input on the process and the content from all of our stakeholders. So yeah, how it has been perceived very positively. So all good news for hopefully a second UCRA.
Thank you, Julie. So we have now a couple of questions for Gis. So Gis, the first one is just a kind request if you can share the link to the report that it was mentioned in your presentation. And then the other one is, which countries have climate labels for buildings that take into account adaptation measures?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I know that countries like Austria and France and Flanders as well have climate labels. Yeah, we were mainly focused on Netherlands, and I don't know exactly the details of the climate labels in other countries. Maybe someone else from the audience knows.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I would just, so if there are no major questions, I would just, one just final question for Alessandro about the European taxonomy. Although the taxonomy directive is great for insurance company to measure how much of the activity contribute to climate adaptation, there are challenges in how we can build in price incentives in insurance product. As we do not know which climate adaptation measure have what effect on claim burdens, what price discount or penalty can we give? Comprehensive research will be extremely useful. So please, Alessandro.
Thanks, Chiara. I'll start from the end. I think that on the product manufacturing side, probably is a matter of I mean, internal processes in assessing risks and risk reduction related to adaptation policies and activities. I must say that the supervisory authorities are actually working to identify and support with data and numbers the risk reduction related to sustainable activities and therefore also to climate adaptation activities. So we need to, let's say, wait a little bit to see the ongoing processes. Actually, as I mentioned before, the European Union is on a ambitious and brave, let's say, path towards climate objectives. We gotta walk the walk for a couple of years to see the full effects of the policy intervention of the last 5 years. So we need to be a little bit patient on these. But again, it's starting to be plenty of best practices, shared best practices on innovative financial instruments that start to consider, and we've seen it also today actually, to consider climate change mitigation and adaptation in their strategies and risk assessment. So probably ClimateFit project will be a great example of this in trying to build a strong network also among financial market operators and financial investment entities to support each other in creating, developing new strategies, action plans, and financial instruments, innovative financial instruments on climate adaptation. So let's see, I mean, follow the project and keep in touch in the future.
Thank you, thank you. So we can now move to the final part of the webinar. It was like quite intensive morning with a lot of inspiring speeches and talks and testimonies. As mentioned at the opening of our webinar, it was just the first, one of our first activity. So please we hope to keep in touch, to follow us on our different social media channel. I would really thank all the speakers, the external one, and also our ClimateFit partners for being part of this intense webinar. A special thanks to our coordinator, Stella, to my colleagues at CMCC, Giulia and Benedita, but also to the colleagues at ISTASIF, Chiara, Sara, and Alessandro, and also to the Enviros colleague, Giri and Tamar, who were in the background, and their collaboration was essential and crucial for running this webinar. So it was just one of our first appointment, one of our first activity. So please keep in touch and stay tuned. And I wish you also a fruitful and enjoyable rest of the day. And see you soon. Bye-bye.